And now, Anodyne for Expansion, Meiji, Japan, the Mormons, and Charles LeGendre, by Sandra T. Caruthers. The first decades following the Meiji Restoration of 1868 in Japan witnessed an intensive search for new ideas, Western techniques, and foreign advice. The excitement of this rapid change and modernization drew many Europeans and Americans to Tokyo, where some were hired to advise the government about such matters as Western legal procedure, education, military technology, and foreign policy. The latter category was one of particular interest, since a desire to extend the boundaries of Japan had been present in certain groups since late Tokugawa days. Any expansion would have to be carefully planned, however, since a preeminent goal of the Meiji oligarchs was to modernize and strengthen the country to ward off Western interference. A foreign adventure might draw the opposition of the major powers, a risk to be carefully avoided. Thus, Western counselors to the Japanese Foreign Office could serve a doubly useful purpose. Knowing Western attitudes, they could help formulate a course that would attract a minimum of outside opposition and would at the same time strengthen and improve Japan's strategic position in East Asia against potential enemies. Of the advisors to the Japanese Foreign Office during the 1870s, perhaps the most influential were the Frenchman Émile Boissonade and the French-born naturalized American citizen Charles William LeGendre. Little has been written about LeGendre, but the advice he rendered to the Foreign Office during his Japanese career came to have particular significance in the light of Japan's later history. LeGendre, 1830 to 1899, had emigrated to the United States from France in the 1850s. His military service to the Union cause during the Civil War had qualified him for a minor patronage post, and he was appointed consul to Amoy, China, in 1867. The position, relatively unimportant in itself, whetted his ambition to serve in a diplomatic office, which held greater opportunities. Hoping to impress the State Department with his abilities, he enlarged the scope of his routine commercial duties in Amoy and then publicized his accomplishments and observations. The situation on the island of Formosa particularly attracted his attention, for the territory was partly inhabited by aborigines who often attacked and murdered shipwrecked seamen. LeGendre first visited Formosa after the wreck of the American bark Rover in 1867. In the course of investigating this disaster, he undertook many visits to the island and became well acquainted with its inhabitants, the geography and natural resources of the land, and the lax manner in which it was administered by the Chinese government. His published observations on these and other matters aroused the antagonism of his immediate superior minister to China, Frederick F. Lowe, who felt LeGendre was overstepping the bounds of his duties. This did not bother the ambitious LeGendre, who hoped to use his accomplishments as proof of his ability to serve in a more responsible and lucrative post in the American diplomatic service. LeGendre was thwarted in his ambitions. Although friends in New York succeeded in having his name presented to the United States Senate as Minister to Buenos Aires, the nomination was rejected, ostensibly because of his foreign birth. LeGendre now determined to return to the United States to secure for himself a new position, while stopping over in Japan on his way home. However, he made the acquaintance of the American minister Charles E. DeLong, an enthusiastic supporter of the new Meiji regime. DeLong encouraged him to resign his consular post and to take a position as advisor to the Japanese Foreign Office, where his knowledge of Formosa would be of particular value. Apparently considering this only temporary employment, LeGendre accepted the Japanese offer. During the next year, he participated in 2 diplomatic missions to China and helped plan and execute a successful expedition to Formosa. Although the Japanese did not retain that island at this time, 1874, LeGendre's efforts did help to pave the way for Japan to detach the Ryukyu Islands from China. The diplomatic successes that followed Japan's military exploits gave notice to the world that the Meiji government was rapidly acquiring the means to become a major Far Eastern power and was being helped toward this goal by foreign advisors. Following the Formosa expedition, LeGendre returned to Tokyo, uncertain as to his future job prospects, although he would have liked to resume his American diplomatic career. The ill will that accrued to him as a result of his role in Japan's Formosa campaign probably ruled that out. As advisor to the Foreign Office, he had already begun to submit memoranda on Japan's social and administrative system, economy, and foreign policy to the Home Minister, his superior, Okuma Shigenobu. Wide-ranging and ambitious in scope, these memoranda attracted favorable attention and led to the decision to retain LeGendre in the Japanese service. In the course of the years 1874 to 1875, he drew up a series of reports relating to the future of Japan, the growth of the empire, and its role as a potential leader in the Far East. A major goal in Japan's foreign policy was to strengthen the country's role in Far Eastern diplomacy. To build up the nation's economy and strategic position, LeGendre turned to the question of colonizing the northern island of Japan, Yeso, Hokkaido. Since the paper he prepared on this matter proposed the settlement in Hokkaido of Mormons from Utah, an analysis of this memorandum sheds light on LeGendre's views of Japan and its future, and also provides a curious example of how an American in Asia viewed the Mormon question of the 1870s. The Japanese government had established a colonization office for Hokkaido in 1869. LeGendre felt that this project was of particular importance since the development of Hokkaido would provide additional revenue for the hard-pressed administration and would also serve as a buffer against future Russian expansion. The Russians, who were rapidly moving into the maritime provinces and the Amur region, seemed to be the most likely potential threat to Japan. LeGendre advised the Japanese government to build a railroad into the interior of the sparsely inhabited island, as the United States had done to stimulate future Western settlements. Since the rigors of pioneering would hold little inducement for the Japanese themselves, LeGendre first proposed attracting Chinese to settle there. They were, he noted, excellent pioneers and would soon make headway against the wilderness. They were industrious and capable of adapting themselves to any circumstances, but upon further consideration, LeGendre decided that the Chinese presented certain drawbacks as colonists. They are not military-minded, not through lack of courage, but because they prefer quiet and ease to the dictates of honor, conscience, and patriotism. Men that are thus indifferent to the freedom of their own soil are certainly not to be trusted with the protection of the country of others. A major purpose of the colonization was to create a buffer between the Japanese Empire and an expansionist Russia, and LeGendre compared the settlers to the Hungarians in the Middle Ages, who had acted in this way to prevent the Turks from overrunning Europe. Chinese settlement would not serve this purpose, even though intermarriage with Japanese would eventually eliminate the disadvantages. The assimilative process would take too long, and thus LeGendre dismissed the idea of Chinese colonization. Next, the prospect of attracting European colonists was considered. Europeans were trained in the arts of both peace and war, and also tended to become very loyal to a new home, as evidenced by their settlement of the United States. But the drawback to any Occidental emigration was the general European insistence on the right of extraterritoriality. These settlers would not voluntarily give up the protection of European or Western laws for those of Japan. LeGendre did not feel that extraterritoriality should be conceded to them, since the Meiji government was rightly attempting to terminate this feature of the unequal treaties. In a memorandum written in July 1875, LeGendre advanced the possibility of inducing Mormons from Utah to emigrate to the northern island. He had learned of the Mormons' quarrel with the federal government over polygamy because of the exceptional circumstances then prevailing in the relationship of the Mormons to Washington. They might be interested in seeking a new homeland. LeGendre noted that the uncertainty and danger brought about by the opposition made to the maintenance of their social organization within the limits of the United States had not only caused emigration to Utah to cease, but it forced many Mormons to look for a new home. Although some Mormons had moved to Mexico, opposition to their faith from the Catholic religion made this only a temporary solution. Similarly, Mormon colonization in Hawaii brought objections from the numerically superior Protestant missionaries there. But Japan, LeGendre noted, had no established religion, and the Edict of Toleration passed 2 years earlier had ended the long proscription against Christianity. Neither the Mormon argument with the federal government nor the prejudice against the Mormons in the United States, he concluded, should predispose the Japanese government to view them with alarm or hostility. LeGendre then attempted to explain to Okuma the nature of Mormon beliefs. Having no first-hand knowledge of the subject, he apparently derived his information from T.B. Stenhouse's recently published book, The Rocky Mountain Saints. His comments reflected a peculiar combination of curiosity, admiration, and insensitivity to religious belief. LeGendre stated that in many respects, Mormonism was similar to the Muslim faith and not unlike the practices of the revered Japanese hero Tokugawa Ieyasu, founder of the Tokugawa shogunate in the 17th century. The practice of polygamy had produced large families in the course of a few years that otherwise would have taken many generations. He also commented that, unlike Muslims, The Mormons allowed for future revelations, and thus were not bound to an inflexible dogma. Mormonism, like Confucianism, has nothing to fear for the future. The story of the founding of the faith and the wanderings and tribulations of its adherents aroused the admiration of LeGendre. Their persecution, he emphasized, had made the Mormons only more prosperous and powerful, and their settlement in Utah had accomplished what at first would have seemed beyond human force to accomplish. They actually conquered the desert. As proof of their desirability as potential colonists in Japan, LeGendre emphasized the economic achievements of the Utah Mormons. If it be true that races like men are to be judged by their works, he wrote, evidence of their achievements would be the best testament of Mormon industry. The memorandum contained extensive charts copied from the 9th Census Report of the United States, 1870, which listed the wealth, taxation, and agricultural, industrial mining production of the counties of Utah. If men of such energy, perseverance, and skill as the Mormons could be induced to seek upon the hospitable shores of Japan that new Jerusalem, which for so many years they have in vain been looking for in the United States, my conviction is strong they would not fail to confer great benefits upon this new country of their adoption. LeGendre did not say that these traits might be more characteristic of Anglo-Saxon or Teutonic peoples than of Orientals, but an inferred slight may well have offended the proud and ethnocentric Japanese to whom the proposal was addressed. LeGendre also had nothing but praise for other social and cultural attributes of the Mormons. The practice of polygamy would rapidly increase the population, he stated, and intermarriage with the native Ainu and Japanese would also spread the technical knowledge possessed by the Mormons throughout Japan. Since these colonists would need to be patriotic and law-abiding Japanese subjects, LeGendre attempted to reassure Okuma that their defiance of American law was neither the result of their faith nor their character. He noted that when the Mormons were not provoked, they were law-abiding. The Mormons would be more likely than any other people I can think of to respect the laws of their newly adopted country, not only because of their gratitude to their august sovereign, to whom they would become indebted for their final deliverance from oppression, but also because of the very nature of their theocratic institutions which prepared them for obedience. The Mormon settlers would quickly become respectful subjects of Japan, LeGendre felt, as long as they were allowed to continue polygamy, the practice of which they were unalterably opposed to abandoning. Since the Mormons seemed to face extermination if they remained in the United States, LeGendre was confident that they would look upon an invitation to settle in Hokkaido as a message from heaven. He reassured the Japanese that the entire Utah population would not emigrate, since the aged and the very young would be unable to withstand the rigors of pioneering in Japan, and since some Mormons would have to remain in Utah to administer property there, probably only about 15,000 of the younger members of the faith would undertake the venture, with all its attendant hardships. There would be little cultural conflict, LeGendre felt, because of the circumstances of their coming to Japan. The Mormons would no doubt endeavor to get along with the Japanese, ignoring many real bases for cultural clashes between any Eastern and Western peoples. LeGendre noted that there is nothing in Mormonism that can possibly conflict with either the political or social organization of the Japanese. It is obvious that LeGendre's own positivistic bias made it easy for him to concentrate on the social aspects of Mormonism and to exaggerate the likelihood of Mormon willingness to move to Japan, nor did LeGendre foresee any friction over religious beliefs. Following a humanistic or deistic approach to religion, he did not see any merit in the Mormon faith. To my mind, Mormonism is as much a superstition as any of the sects that prevail among other people in this or any other country, he remarked with characteristic lack of religious sentiment. Religious fervor was a passing phase in human history, which would be outgrown as man progressed. The ready acceptance of Mormonism had been due to the ignorance of the people, but their children, having received much greater advantages, are likely to grow more and more indifferent to the purely religious portion of their system of ethics. Such an abandonment of their theology, LeGendre thought, would not affect the admirable Mormon social organization. The Japanese, too, would of course become gradually emancipated from any religion, and together with the Mormons would attain a degree of moral independence from which all superstition is excluded, and the mind becomes satisfied with the reflex of the deity within. To him, the goal of mankind was an enlightened humanism where men would elevate their own individuality and aid the downcast, the sorrowing, and the oppressed, realizing the peace and happiness of true liberty and manly independence, which it is the aim of every truly great soul, irrespective of any religious faith, to obtain in this world. This, said LeGendre, was the trend in both Europe and America. These views were typical of the French Enlightenment and probably the product of LeGendre's childhood experiences in France. He had not resided in the United States long enough to perceive the greater religious enthusiasm there. Likewise, he did not recognize the particular affinity of the Mormon faith for its American homeland, and was unaware that transplanting it to Japan might cause problems of loss of identity. Certain non sequiturs in his analysis of Mormon belief become clear, as one notes his assumption that the Mormons would suffer almost anything rather than abandon polygamy, and his conclusion that their entire faith would wither away in the near future. The only opposition to bringing such a desirable group of colonists to Japan would come, LeGendre felt, from those who advocated Japanese homogeneity in customs and political and economic systems. The sole element of Mormon culture which seemed to him to be strikingly different from the culture of Japan was polygamy, and LeGendre advised the Japanese to weigh its merits and drawbacks carefully before coming to a final decision on the system. He himself felt that the practice had numerous benefits when considered aside from the purely religious issue. It tended to place more authority in the father and made of the extended family a tightly knit group that handed down traditions, customs, and occupations from father to son. The monogamous family, on the other hand, promoted a greater spirit of individual enterprise and initiative. Although these were desirable characteristics of society in Europe and America, he believed that they were the outgrowth of social and political institutions as well as of marriage patterns. Since Japan was undergoing such a rapid transformation, an industrial revolution accompanied by many new ideas from abroad, he felt that the traits of individual enterprise and initiative would be brought into the culture anyway. He reiterated that the system of polygamy would enable Japan to retain the desirable features of an authoritarian family life. As an afterthought, he noted that the system of concubinage practiced in Japan was superior to monogamy anyway, because single marriage tended to lead to the less desirable practice of having outside mistresses.